Okay, this is a book review. I previously did a book review on a book called Imperium about Cicero, the greatest of all of the ancient Romans. And the book is by Robert Harris. He's a magnificent author. This book was a bestseller, deservedly so. It's very entertaining to listen to the audiobook. This guy, Robert Harris, the author, did a fantastic job of really studying the history of ancient Rome in detail. Let me move myself out of here for a sec. Here's just another version of the cover of Cicero. And Cicero, again, the greatest of all Romans. What I love about him was, he wasn't wealthy. He wasn't a big aristocrat. He didn't have a big army. He didn't have a lot of money. He simply became the leader of Rome because he was so smart and he was very good and he was a great speaker. So he inspires you that you as an individual could do more with yourself and your opportunities if you develop some skills like Cicero had. Okay, so I previously did a separate book review of Imperium. Now here's the next book in the series of books about Cicero and ancient Rome, also by Robert Harris. This one's called Conspirata, a novel of ancient Rome. After I read that, I had another book about Cicero that I had sitting around that I'd previously read, so I just read it again real fast, How to Win an Argument by James May. This book was not so good. He didn't put it together into a coherent story, so I would not recommend this book. I would say that Imperium is a magnificent book. I'd give that 9 out of 10 stars. It was a great book. I think everybody should read that. This one was good. I would give this like a 6 or 7 stars. I liked it because I like Cicero, and I really like having a deeper understanding of ancient Rome because it's very useful to understand ancient Rome. Lots of things happen nowadays, and everybody's embarrassed to talk about them because it's very touchy to talk about things that happened in the last 100 years versus people talk freely about what happened in ancient Rome and political power personalities come out. I think everybody should study ancient Rome if you want to be well educated about history. Briefly, you can't get away from the ancient Greeks. Here's Demosthenes, who was one of the great orators of the ancient Greeks, and he was famous for saying, what are the 3 most important things in public speaking? He said delivery, delivery, delivery. Just like, in real estate, they say location, location, location. And Demosthenes trained himself speaking at the ocean with pebbles in his mouth to improve his delivery and to right the wrongs where he had been cheated out of his family inheritance. So anyways, that's one of the famous oratory speeches. And Cicero studied him and the other great orators of the Greek tradition. Cicero had been raised by a Greek tutor, so he was fluent in both Greek and Latin. Later on, when he went into exile, he had more time to write, and he wrote an excellent book called De Oratore, on oratory, how to become a great speaker. Okay, so I think everybody should study ancient Rome, especially if you want to have power in your life or you want to understand power, because this is at the time when the triumvirate was formed between Pompey, the great general, they call him Pompey the Great. Julius Caesar was an incredible badass, incredible general, the greatest general of all the Romans, a nation of great generals. Okay, here is Marcus Licinius Crassus, and these guys are all badasses. He was the richest guy in Rome, but you just see how brutal, how smart these guys were, and it teaches you something about life, It's one of the bad things about that type of power. It attracts these sort of brutal, ruthless peoples. Here's just an example of Crassus. Crassus was a rich guy and wanted to make a name for himself as a military commander. So when there was a slave revolt, the Spartacus revolt, Crassus helped put down the revolt, and then there were 6,000 prisoners, and he just crucified all of them. He crucified 6,000 slaves along the Appian Way, the main busiest road in Rome. And that's just a sense of the brutality of it. There was no law to restrain him. He just said, slaves in revolt, they all need to be crucified. Just crucified them. Okay, that's the way things are in Rome. Very brutal. Here's just another picture of Spartacus crucifying 6,000 slaves on Appian Way in Rome. Okay, and then here's just one quick show of, give you a sense of Julius Caesar. The Gauls were a long-term, very powerful enemy of the Romans. And Cicero just went over there and kicked the crap out of him. He was a magnificent general, the greatest of the great. Vercingetorix, the leader of the Gauls, had to surrender to him. And then they take them back as prisoners and parade them in front of the Roman people. They love to have a triumph, for example. Okay, now here's Cicero, and in comparison with these guys, Crassus, Pompey, and Julius Caesar, Cicero's very humble. He doesn't have much money. He doesn't have much power. The main thing he's got going for himself is he's very clever. He's a very good speaker. He's a great lawyer, and these are just his friends. You know, his brother Quintus helps him, and then he's got some other friends and supporters. He's got a smart wife, Terentia, who gives him good advice. He's got 2 kids, but he's really relatively simple and weak compared to these other big heavyweights in the ancient Rome power politics. But that's kind of what I admire about him is with so little resources, he did so many good things. And he was trying to restore the Republic or maintain the Republic. Here's another one of his allies. This is Marcus Porcius Cato the Younger, and he was called the conscience of the Senate. And he also was trying to maintain the traditional ways of the Roman Republic. So Rome had a monarchy, and it had grown to hate kings, and then it moved towards having it's my background there. Then it moved towards a republic, and that was a very good thing. And then later on, it drifted into becoming an empire. And so this is sort of the tail end of the Republic, the Republic trying to preserve itself through Cicero and through Cato and a few others. And it was a very noble, good thing. The founding fathers of the USA studied it a lot to try to optimize things. Now here's a nice painting of Cicero when he's denouncing Catiline. Catiline had set up a conspiracy to assassinate Cicero and to also take over Rome. Okay, and as Cicero denounced his bad behavior and that they had the information on the co-conspirators with Catiline, the other senators in the Roman Senate moved themselves away. They distanced themselves from Catiline. And Cicero made some very famous speeches about Catiline. We'll go into that a little later. This ended up being a very big deal in the rule of Cicero. And here's, I think, an even better painting. There's Cicero speaking. All the senators have moved away. And there is Catiline. So Catiline was an aristocrat. Senators are aristocrats. Tribunes come from the plebeians, okay, the peasants, so to speak, like the proles of that time. Cicero was called a new man, meaning that he had rose up. One metaphor that came up in the book was the idea of the Hydra from Greek mythology. It's like a 9-headed snake, and that if you chop off one of the heads of the snake, it'll just grow right back. So this is Hercules fighting the Hydra, and here's his assistant cauterizing the necks of the snakes that's heads have been cut off so the head doesn't grow back. And the relevance of this was that as soon as he would solve one political problem when he was consul, head of Rome, another one would arise. And so Cicero had to be very clever on his feet, very nimble and quick-witted to survive disaster after disaster. Cicero has lots of great quotes. Constant practice devoted to one subject often prevails over both ability and skill. Yeah, a person can go a long way with training. The function of wisdom is to discriminate between good and evil. Okay, here I'll just shrink myself here. I won't go through all this stuff, it's too much, but I'll go through a couple of little things about Cicero. Again, he's the greatest of Romans, and if you only study one Roman, study Cicero. He's in the middle of everything, the transition from republic to empire, the greatest orators, the greatest generals, the greatest conflicts in Rome. You study the ancient Greeks to learn about the greatness of mankind. Studying the ancient Greeks is beautiful. I talked about that before, from about 500 BC to 300 BC. Whereas you study ancient Rome to understand power politics and how men behave once they have total power. And it makes you understand why you don't want anybody to have total power. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And Rufus Fehr is the greatest professor of Wondrium, or the Great Courses series, PhD guy from Harvard. He said, Cicero is the noblest of all Romans. Cicero is the Roman equivalent of Plato. He was equally fluent in Greek as he was in Latin. Like I said, he was raised by Greek tutors. And he's most famous for his magnificent oratory. Later on, there was a famous teacher of oratory in Rome named Quintilian. And he would go on praising Cicero. So Cicero, like I said, a lot of these Romans were just brutal thugs, whereas Cicero was this brilliant, sort of noble, good guy. He wasn't perfect, nobody is, but he was really good. Okay, I made a little joke. They formed a triumvirate. Pompey, the great Pompey general, Julius Caesar, the great general, and also Crassus, the so-so general but richest man in Rome, and they asked Cicero to join. And in retrospect, he probably should have joined, but Cicero was disgusted by the idea because he felt it was a betrayal of the ideals of the Roman Republic. So Cicero refused to join the triumvirate. However, once he did that, Pompey withdrew his support for some connections that Cicero had, and this led to Cicero losing money, putting him at risk to lose his house. And also, they didn't protect him from an enemy of Cicero named Claudius, who figured out a way to get Cicero in trouble, that Cicero had not had a trial for the conspirators with Catiline and before they were executed. The Senate had voted on it, but the lack of a trial enabled this enemy of Cicero named Claudius to figure out a way to get Cicero in big trouble. Okay. So this is why I think everybody should study ancient Rome. You learn power politics big time. You learn to see how these governments behave. They're usually basically a group of men who together loot a country. Okay, that's what a rulership usually is. And then they start trading off favors to grow their own power. And they tend to have very little consideration for the plebeians, the proles, the peasants, basically as little as they can get away with. They love going into distant lands and plundering things. Okay, this is a very common situation. So they've taken all the education about the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans out of the schools. And I think this is why, because it's so darn valuable. And I've heard also people say the most important thing is to learn about religion when you're young, because then it sticks with you better and it makes society moral, and you're not going to have a moral society without religion. So the three most useful things, ancient Romans, ancient Greeks, and religion and Christianity are not taught in the schools anymore. And that's why the kids don't learn almost anything that they can recall. Other great things to learn about ancient Rome. You see the brutal men, Caesar, Crassus, Pompey. You see evil, crazy men. Caligula, Nero was a vindictive monster. Pro-rays, well, we don't even get into all the terrible things Nero did. I talked about that in my book review of Quo Vadis, Commodus, another terrible emperor, the son of Marcus Aurelius. The contrast between the early Christianity and the pagans. Okay, Quo Vadis is the best book for that. Maranatha, the Lord comes. Christianity brought forgiveness into the world on a large scale. So that was to come. All this was after the time of Cicero. Another thing I like about studying the ancient Romans is the contrast of the philosophical schools between the Roman pagans. They were tough guys, though, man. They were great fighters. The Roman legions basically conquered all the known world just about in those days. Great fighters. Stoics are interesting, like the Greek slave Epictetus and the Roman emperor later, Marcus Aurelius. Epicureans were kind of wimpy, hedonistic. And your Epicureans, they can't stand up to barbarians, okay? I like this one quote, without faith, there can be no virtue. Why did Rome fall? A lot of reasons. Loss of patriotism, loss of the Republic, lead plumbing, making them stupid. Okay, here's reasons to study the ancient Greeks. I'm not going to go into that today. I got plenty of other talks on the ancient Greeks. Okay, Cicero from Imperium. There were a lot of great lines in Imperium, and Imperium was more about how Cicero rose to power and became consul, the head man in Rome. I highly recommend you read that book. I gave a previous book review on it. Now I'm talking about Conspirata, also by Robert Harris, and this one was more the actual consul leadership of Rome by Cicero. And what you saw is one after another conspiracy to push him out of power or even to kill him. Okay, it was brutal. Okay, the book was magnificent. Well, very good. Imperium was magnificent. This was very good, but I still enjoyed it. I enjoyed it quite a bit. And if Robert Harris, I'm going to read other books by Robert Harris. I was so impressed by him as a writer. Okay, our minds have an insatiable desire to know the truth. Smart people feel that way. Cicero loved the Greeks. He said, I'd rather be wrong with Plato than right with a Pythagorean. Plato was the first to call philosophy down from the heavens and focus it on the people, to inquire about our standards, our goods and evil. Okay, so he liked Plato and, of course, Socrates. He was a big reader. Cicero was always reading all the time. He had a tremendous fount of knowledge. And he said a good orator should be a good philosopher. They must have an in-depth knowledge of the common subjects like history and rhetoric. Okay, orator has three functions: to teach, to please, to move. The main thing he focused on was emotion, because if you could stir the emotion of the crowd, you could get them to support your verdict, your client as a lawyer, because that's how he started out mostly, as a lawyer. Okay, let's see. So if you want to study rhetoric, Cicero is great on that. A great quote, "Cui bono, who benefits?" A lot of times when something's happening, whoever wanted that to happen in big money is the driving force behind it. So I would say if you're serious about understanding debate and argument, Cicero's full of good tricks on how he uses props and paintings, how he puts the key phrase of his case into a rhyme. He says rhyme is a magnet for the ear. Make a rhyme for the key part of your presentation. Repeat your key points over and over till the audience gets it, because whatever it is that you repeat, they will believe it. And he would pile up accusations on Catiline over and over that were good. Praise your opponents, criticize your foes. This is a really good video here by this guy. I think his name's Greg Aldrete, and he's a professor of ancient Rome studies, and he gave a lecture on how Cicero was such a convincing speaker and how he used hand gestures, facial gestures, and it's quite a good lecture. Okay, this is just sort of Cicero denouncing Catiline or other opponents, and how he would use all kinds of accusations, which sound in a sense kind of harsh, but he'd win his cases as a lawyer. Okay, here's one I like about Cicero talking about the Republic. He said, "The Republic this is the Republic of ancient Rome. The Republic when we inherited it was like a beautiful painting whose colors were already fading with age. But in our time, not only have we neglected to freshen it by renewing the original colors, but we have not even bothered to preserve its forms and outlines. What now is left of the ancient customs on which the Commonwealth of Rome was firmly founded? They have been so utterly buried in oblivion that they are not only no longer practiced, but they are forgotten." So yeah, he was real sad that Roman Republic was sort of fading away. And again, here's that lecture by Gregory Aldrete. I'll put a link to it in the description. It's quite good. So anyways, I hope that was interesting. I do think the book was worth reading, Conspirata by Robert Harris.